Hello, you're listening to Poured Over, the Barnes & Noble podcast. My name is Chris Gillespie. My guest today is the author of 8 New York Times bestsellers, including Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law, and Packing for Mars, The Curious Science of Life in the Void. She has a new book out this fall entitled Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Mary Roach. Mary, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you so much, Chris.
So, thinking about your past books, many of them just have a one word title: Stiff, Fuzz, Gulp. I know there's subtitles. Replaceable You is a little bit longer. Did you have a one word working title for the new book, or how did you arrive at calling it Replaceable You?
I didn't have a one word. This was a tough one. Packing for Mars, similarly, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't come up with a one word title. No, I didn't have one. I knew all along I wanted to use Replaceable You. It's something that this goes back to an old Woody Allen book where he said he had this joke. He compared something to that would be like a moose in spats singing Embraceable You, which cracked me up for some reason. I don't know. Back then I found that kind of thing funny. And I know Embraceable You is it's like an old standard, Embraceable You. I can't even sing it, but
Mm-hmm.
um so that popped into my head. A play on Embraceable You. That's where it came from. No, I didn't. What would it be? One word.
Uh,
My topics are my books are so broad that sometimes it's hard to come up with something. And Fuzz was going to be animal, vegetable, criminal.
mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
around the time the book was coming out, a book was released under the title Animal, Vegetable, Junk: A History of Food, Mark Bittman.
Uh,
So at the
mm-hmm.
last minute, we changed the name.
Replaceable You is a good title for this book. As I've shown, I have it with me here. I've been reading it and enjoying it. For the listener at home, Replaceable You is yet another Mary Roach kind of classic book. It's another science-based title, but this time you're exploring the human body, which you've written about to some extent before in your previous books in different capacities. But this time you're looking at the entire body and investigating ways that we humans have tried to replace, substitute, or in even some cases augment body parts over the years, from limbs
Right.
to organs to even hair. What first inspired you to write about this subject, like at this point in your career?
I got a email from a woman named Judy Berna, she was a reader, and she said, I think your next book should be about professional football referees. And I'm like, I don't really, not really a sports gal. I don't watch football, but I don't know. For some reason, she thought it should be that. But we were emailing back and forth, and she happened to mention that she's an amputee, specifically an elective amputee, which I hadn't heard of. And that is somebody who makes the decision to have part of their leg or part or all of of a limb removed, even though it's healthy. It's a limb that's underperforming, but it's
Mm.
still a viable limb. So to find a surgeon to do that was really hard for her. To find a surgeon who's willing to cut off a viable limb and replace it with a prosthetic. But she'd seen enough people, hiking and running and doing things that she couldn't do. People with prosthetics who had a much better quality of life. So she finally found a surgeon who was willing to do it. Anyway, I found that fascinating, and then there were a couple other things around that time that kind of got me headed in that direction.
Well, how much time does it take? Because I mean, the amount of research that must go into a book like this. I think any kind of science-based title, but specifically something that's about the human anatomy, which is such a complex, like, I mean, people are actually doctors in this kind of stuff, and like there's so much information to, I imagine, learn, juggle through. But you also travel, it seems like, almost all over the world in this book. I know you go to, I think it's Mongolia at one point, and you travel to other places. So how long did this kind of book take you from that initial outreach to kind of where we are right now?
Oh man, the whole process is about 3 years because there's
Hmm.
a whole year of production time from when I turn the book in to when it comes out. Sometimes it's
Hmm.
more than it may be even a little more than a year. So the whole thing, yeah, the whole thing is about 3 years. Yeah, from start to finish, which sounds like a really long time looking back. I must be very slow. A lot of what I do is setting yeah, I do a fair amount of travel, but all of the travel depends on the schedule of the researcher. So sometimes, someone will say, "Well, I'm not doing that until summer of next year," or
Hmm.
so I'm constantly having to kind of work around other people's schedules. So it can take a while. And I stupidly, I dive into a different sort of subtopic for every chapter. There's 17 chapters and I'm kind of going off on a different subtopic for each one. So I got to get up to speed a little bit on every one of those. So it does take a while, but I know people who do this kind of thing. It seems like they do it in a full year and I'm like, "How the hell are you doing this?" And you're teaching on top of that. I don't know. I'm maybe a little slow.
I
Let's say
think
thorough. Let's say thorough.
I would say thorough. I would say comprehensive. Like I think it's like I said, you're traveling around and you're writing. I think some of the longest words that I've ever seen. There are certain parts where I was going through the book and I was like, that's a whole word. Like, oh my God, because I'm not, a science
Yeah,
person or an expert on things, but it's so well researched that I'm not surprised that it took that, amount of time.
yeah, not too many. I think the longest word in there is kind of a fun one. Omphalolith, which is a belly button stone.
Oh wow.
Instead of a gallstone or a kidney stone, you can get a
Mhm.
belly button stone, which is like basically just, you need to clean your belly button more often. So stuff gets in there and hardens and becomes like a fossil. It's disgusting. Anyway, that was a footnote. It's not actually. I don't have a chapter on navel stones, but I was delighted to find out that there is a word for the navel stones. Omphalolith.
So, listener, if you take nothing else from our conversation today, make sure that you clean yourself thoroughly. Speaking about the footnotes, that is kind of a signature part of your style and what you're known for. How do the footnotes come about? Like, are those things that you're consciously when you're writing a chapter being like, oh, I need a certain number of footnotes, or do they just kind of happen organically? How do you decide what's going to get a footnote?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's not something that I plan.
Hmm.
It's just, it's like an imperative. Sometimes I stumble onto a paper and I'm just agog that such a thing exists or that somebody did that. It's like, wow, holy shit, this is actually something that they did. And or it's something I stumble onto in my research online or who knows where I find it, but it's so fascinating, bizarre, whatever it is that I have to include it. However, it doesn't really fit into the narrative of the chapter. It would kind of be a big side trip for people as they're reading
Hmm.
to sort of stick it in as a parenthetical. So I put it at the bottom of the page, and it's just I know it when I see it. Um, I'm trying to think of there's so many of them in this book. They're like the navel stones. I had one about the practice of painting hospitals pale green, and I stumbled onto
Oh yeah.
this guy, and forgetting his name now. This guy who got obsessed with painting the walls dark green and
Hmm.
so it's a different thing than painting a soothing pale green. It was like he was painting them like spinach green, and then he got a because he felt like when you're doing surgery and then you look up and the walls are white, you're kind of blinded, and then you look back to the patient's body and you're temporarily unable to see. So he started painting operating rooms black and all the surgical drapes were black, and he made the surgeons wear black, and people had to take him aside and go, um I think the patients might be a little freaked out if everybody's sort of dressed like the horsemen of the apocalypse, maybe not everything being black anyway. So, uh, fortunately, that practice is no longer no longer being done. But I just love this guy who's like, I don't know, I just feel like I'd be able to see better if everything in the operating room was dark black. Like, anyway, so I get distracted. I guess the short answer is that I get distracted and I really want to share things with readers.
I think it's a fun way of, yeah, like having those kind of fun side notes or anecdotes that that one that you just mentioned, the hospital colors, was something that I remember that I was like, oh well, yeah, I guess that makes sense, because I just kind of took for granted that hospitals have a very specific clinical kind of coloring and feel
Yep.
to it. And I was like, oh man, no wonder the whole black operating room thing didn't catch on, because that sounds terrifying. Like surgery,
Oh
is
yeah.
daunting enough, but to be surrounded by
Be wheeled in by a bunch of people dressed like Halloween ghouls.
yeah.
Yeah, and I love the one there was another one about the history of breast implants and the very fir and the inspiration for, the bag that goes into the breast, the implant itself was apparently this surgeon was looking at just sort of sitting around in the hospital, and he was looking at one of those blood bags of blood hanging from an IV pole. Those
Mhm.
they're kinda plastic bags of blood, and he sort of and he like, I just cracked me up, just like the dude is seeing breasts everywhere, like, "Does that remind you of something? Hey, what if we were to stick that in a woman's breast?" Anyway, that kinda stuff, I can't resist.
Do you have any idea of where your sort of sense of humor comes from? Like, was it something that came from your family? Was it something that was unique to you? Because I mean, your humor is such a big part of your books and your style as an author. What were the origins for that?
I think that it came from my dad, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I never used to think that because my dad was kind of he's of Irish descent, born in England long ago. He was 65 when I was born. Anyway, he used to tell stories. I'm not really a storyteller kind of person, but I was looking into his past many years later. You can do searches on those newspaper archives.
Hmm.
And I found this piece about him where he had listed names of people whose names suited their occupation. And I've always had this thing like I chose the surgeon, the orthopedic surgeon in this book, partly because, he's a guy who works with power tools in the OR. His name is Dr. Saw. Dr. Saw. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. There's a lot. I could have gone to any number of orthopedic clinics to do this chapter.
Hmm.
But this guy, well, first of all, he does a high volume, that's part of it, but it's his name is Doctor Saw, I can't resist. So my dad obviously had that same bent, that same sensibility of finding humor in these kind of odd little twists of life.
Hmm. That kind of dry British Irish sense of humor.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, yeah, and just an eye for that sort of, um, detail.
Hmm. When you were growing up, how did you first become interested in writing? I do feel like I have to say, because I know that you were born in New Hampshire. You're from New Hampshire originally. I am in New Hampshire currently. I was also born here, so I feel like I have to make the New Hampshire shout out. I know that you don't live here currently, but what was life like growing up in New Hampshire?
Well, I grew up in a small town, Etna, New Hampshire,
Hmm.
which is out just outside Hanover, where my dad taught. Um, and it was a very much a rural upbringing. My neighbors had snowmobiles, and they hunted, and they drove a Jeep around the backyard in the mud and cut the heads off the chickens, that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
I, um, and I spent a lot of my childhood over at the neighbor's house, where they did all this kinda stuff, so I don't really know how I was just maybe just a weird kid. I don't know what I remember I got a Barbie doll for I don't know, I was in maybe kindergarten or some 1st grade, something like that, and I wasn't a doll kid, I had little dinosaurs from the Natural History Museum at Dartmouth where, my dad taught. But I didn't I was like, "A Barbie doll, what do I do with this?" And so what I used to do with it is I'd pull off the head and say, "Oh, you have 5 seconds to get the head back on or she dies." And I think that's actually true. If you could put somebody's head back on within 5 seconds, yeah, they'd be okay. So, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's always been there.
That could be the origins of Replaceable You, right? I mean, you literally were trying to replace
Yeah.
the Barbie head and do a head transplant within 5 seconds.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Well, I had a whole, believe it or not, I had a whole chapter in Stiff on how long you, went back to the days of guillotines where
mhm,
there was this. I mean, guillotine was done to be. The idea was that it would be more humane, that it would be instantaneous. But in fact, there were these reports that the heads had some consciousness for a few seconds, and there was a guy who was investigating this who took the heads and rushed them to the lab to see if there was any electrical, like if he could get reactions
mhm.
if he hooked them up to a source of electricity. So anyway, that is something I did look into. Yeah.
So I'm assuming based off of kind of like you were saying, like, there's growing up in rural New Hampshire, that particular area is kind of unique or interesting because there is Dartmouth, located in that and kind of I don't want to say the middle of nowhere, but Dartmouth is the main thing in that general area, aside from obviously very pretty mountains and nature and things like that. But how do you feel about things, because there's certain passages in the book that I for one am very squeamish about blood and surgery and that kind of stuff, and I was wondering if at any point while you're in the operating rooms or you're working with these surgeons, or were you getting squeamish at any point, or are you totally good with everything that you saw while researching this book?
I don't get squeamish. I'm not a squeamish person,
Hmm.
as you may have guessed. For me, it wasn't. There wasn't really anything I saw that I found hard to take. It was, I think, what I heard in the orthopedic operating room.
Mm.
What you're hearing is a lot of power tools. Power saw, a reamer. I mean, and these things are loud, and a mallet. There's something called a surgical mallet, which is used to stick the stem down into the bone where where you're going to replace the joint. So to hear those sounds, and my husband has a workshop, so I hear those sounds all the time. He makes frames and other things, and builds little tables and things. And I'm used to those sounds, but not when they're happening to a human body. So and that's one of the reasons why general anesthesia is used, like a deeper form of sedation. You could just do a spinal epidural and numb somebody, and
Hmm.
they could be awake for say a knee replacement, but the sounds are such that it probably is a good idea to not have them hearing what's going on. Like, bam, bam, bam. Just you don't want to hear that happening to your knee.
What was there anything that struck you as particularly surprising that you learned while you were researching this new book? I know that I learned quite a bit about organ donation and prosthetic limbs, and everything seemed to be much more complicated and nuanced than I think I perhaps would have imagined. But what was something that was like your main takeaway from all of the experiences?
I was surprised. I was surprised that you can take a heart out of a body, disconnect it, and it will keep beating for as long as 10 minutes. Okay, so the guy who told me this, he's a surgical resident, and he was telling me this, and then later he sent me a video of a heart that had been removed, and it was it was still beating. This is, I believe, a pig heart. It's still beating, and it had been cut in half, kind of sliced like a deli sandwich roll,
Mm-hmm.
and it's still beating. Like it's like the extent to which um, cells just do what they're evolved to do is kind of astounding. Even just a layer of cells in a petri dish, they'll start beating in sync. Like, so they're just there they are. They're cells. They're not part of anyone's heart. They're not pumping any blood, but they're just like, you know what? We're cardiomyocytes. This is what we do. We beat. And there they are.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was just wild, kind of astounding.
Was there anyone who you met in your encounters? I know that you just mentioned Dr. Saw, but was there anyone that you were like, this is my favorite character in the book? I know they're real people, of course, but they do, the way that you write about them and everything, they, everyone has a different or every section has a different character or kind of main character sort of as you're going around.
Yeah.
Was there anyone who you're like, you're my person?
I was very fond of Dr. Jeremy Goverman. I was very fond of Jeremy Goverman just because he's the burn surgeon. He works at Mass General, their burn center there. I think it's the Sumner M. Redstone Burn Clinic. And he deals with a lot of very serious, like we're talking, 70% or even more of the body being burned. And that's a very, very serious, horrible situation.
Hmm.
And and that's what he deals with. But I mean, he's just an incredibly patient guy. He was, and I'm like, I'm just gonna follow you around for a day and a half in the OR and in your office. And he's incredibly busy. He's trying to write up his surgical notes, and I'm asking all these questions. And he was just, if I ever got burned, I would definitely want him to be taking care of me. He really and he has these, develops these relationships with these patients because the corrective surgeries that they have to have in the aftermath of serious, third degree burns. Um, there are dozens of operations that happen over a span of years. So he really gets to know the patients. It's really very touching.
I think in a slightly different direction, something that I was also wondering about was, since you've written so many books and you've met so many people and you have all these different experiences, like when you're and because there is that kind of humor bend to a lot of it, when you're in certain moments, how aware are you of like what's going to be, for lack of a better term, like comedy gold of like, oh, this is going to be a good part in the book, versus something that while you're going through your notes and you realize that there's kind of a moment that you didn't realize? How aware of you are you how aware are you in that moment?
Oh, I know. I I I definitely know, and it's very exciting. I can't show that excitement, but there's this little person inside me going, "This is gonna be so fun to write about." Um, yeah, no, you definitely know. Sometimes it comes to you after the fact when you're looking over your notes, and particularly if it's material that doesn't have an obvious narrative scene to relay. Sometimes it comes down to just a exchange of a few sentences or lines of conversation. Um, but I knew, like, for example, I have a chapter where I went to former Soviet Georgia to speak to a in pursuit of a surgeon who had done an unusual penis reconstruction in that he was using the man's middle finger. And the surgeon wasn't there when I showed up unannounced, but
Mhm.
there were people there who said, "We can show you photographs," and so they were showing it. So they opened up the surgeon's laptop and they go, "Here are the photographs from one of these procedures," and because there's a finger in there, they could actually bend the penis, as though it wasn't just a finger. It was
Mhm.
reconstructed. It really looked like a penis. You took some skin from the forearm and wrapped the finger was there for stiffness, but the fingers kind of crooked up as fingers do, bent up, and they in order to show how well situated, I guess, this rebuilt penis was, they had hung a ceramic pitcher on it, and I'm like, I thank you, people, for showing me this because no one expects a ceramic pitcher hanging off a bent penis. That just isn't what you expect. And so, yeah, I was looking at it going, okay, uh-huh, wow, that's fascinating. But inside going, oh my God, it's a picture of a ceramic. And it's white with a floral, kind of a green and red floral, it's like a rustic painting. It's a beautiful picture. And I'm like, was there water in the pitcher? No, the pitcher was empty. So we had this conversation about the pitcher. And anyway, that, yeah, that kind of thing. You just know it's going to be fun to write that up.
That's the kind of moment that makes it worth traveling to former Soviet Georgia. We were like, yep, I just
Yeah.
got my money's worth out of.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And it almost always is, just being somewhere in person is always so much better than trying to do something on Zoom or just by reading about it after the fact.
Mhm.
It just as a writer, it's just you can't beat it.
Is there a difference between, or like, what is your relationship sort of as Mary Roach, the writer, with Mary Roach, the character who is in these moments and kind of, writing about things? Like, do you feel like you have to sort of portray yourself a certain way as a character, or do you feel like the character is kind of pretty accurate to who you are in
It's
reality?
Yeah, it's a great question. I am definitely that person. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't make up my lines, um, and I don't make up any of the things going on. But although that person is me, there's also a lot of me that isn't in the book, which is just the day-to-day boring person going to the
Hmm.
store, fretting about things. Most of me isn't that interesting or funny. It's because it's just me living my life. But put me in a situation with a slide of a penis that's holding up a water pitcher, that whatever I'm saying and doing, that's me. It's the same me that led me to decide to go to former Soviet Georgia just to talk to a surgeon who used a man's middle finger to reconstruct his penis. I have a sort of, I guess, a sense of just curiosity and love of stepping into worlds that are very foreign to me and people. Just I love meeting people, the people who are involved in this work, scientists and researchers. I love their passion and their enthusiasm. And I'm sad that Dr. Kuzanov was not, he was on vacation when I showed up, which, that'll happen. You show up without an appointment.
Hmm.
So I was sad that I didn't get to meet him. And I think had I met him, the chapter would have been different, very different. Who knows what the scene would have been like? Maybe it would have been better. Maybe it would have been less interesting. I don't know. But it's definitely me, it's just not all of me. It's it's not the boring parts of me, and those are big, those parts.
I was wondering about that too, of if you like having written so many works of narrative nonfiction, if there was ever any kind of temptation on your part to be like, to do like a more conventional memoir or a story about you, like the sort of like the moments in between the chapters that we're reading in this book. Has that ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, I think about, writing about my childhood because it was a little bit strange in that my dad was 65 when I was born, and,
Hmm.
um, and I grew up I was a kid in the '70s, which was a kind of a weird time, and I remember saying something to my editor about it, Jill Bielowski at W. Norton, and she goes, "Well, Mary, did you have an interesting childhood?" And I went, "Kinda nothing really happened." So she kind of looks at me like, "Please don't write a memoir.
uh
Please don't do that."
um, that's fair. That's fair. I think one of my favorite sections of the book, or one of my favorite moments that I thought was the funniest, which I was hoping that you'd be able to speak to for the listeners at home who haven't had a chance to check out the book yet, but will, when you go and interact with an iron lung. Uh,
Yes.
that was very funny because things, you initially had a plan of how you were going to handle this, and that did not quite go the way that maybe you were expecting.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. To say the least. Yeah, I really wanted to bring to life that as best I could, that what it is like to have a machine breathe for you, and there are iron lungs that are still in use. Most of them I mean, very few of them. These are, Emerson iron lungs from the 50s and 60s, and they're functional, but nobody gets polio anymore. Well, fast forward 10 years.
Yeah.
Anyway, they people who have chronic lung issues sometimes sleep in an iron lung. Anyway, there's some that are still in use, and so I contacted this man whose wife had recently died, and she had slept in an iron lung, and I wrote and asked if I could do that, if I could come to Kansas City and sleep in the iron lung, and he weirdly enough said yes, and and, yeah, so I thought I'll try this, and because she slept in it, I mean, oh, so I'll sleep in it, but it's a really it's a strange sensation in that you are not controlling when you breathe in and when you breathe out. The machine is doing that. The machine is like, "You leave this to me." So that means, if you try to speak, you have to when you're speaking and you're not thinking about this, but if you're eating or swallowing, thinking, whatever, you're coordinating that with your breathing, and if you tried to do both at the same time, you
Mm.
can't. Like, if you try to speak when you're when you're inhaling, the machine would, like, keep doing what it's doing, so I would try to speak, and I'd be like, "So" literally like that. You can't. And then same with I thought I would try eating, having dinner, in the iron lung, and they were like, "No, you're not doing that. You're absolutely, positively
Yeah.
not eating while you're in the iron lung," because if I chewed something and then started to swallow at the same time as the machine decided you are inhaling now, it would be very easy to inhale the food, and then, you get food in your lungs, you can get pneumonia, you can choke, it's not good. So I was in the iron lung maybe 9 minutes. And they had it up really high. It was I didn't know this, but it was jacked all the way up. It was like in Princess Bride, the machine that Wesley is in when they're like
uh,
the paint well, if you I don't know if you've seen Princess Bride, but anyway, it was all the way up to 11. So
yeah.
it was it was a very so I was starting to get I don't your fingers get a little tingly, and so they turned it down. But it was also, the other thing going on with being in an iron lung, you need to have the collar really tight around your neck. There can't be any air leakage or the vacuum won't work. I mean, it's a system that works by creating a vacuum, which opens up the lungs, which pulls in air. So you have to have a tight seal. So it's not really very sleep inducing. You kind of it's this weird sensation of both breathing really fully and luxuriantly, like, but at the same time feeling like somebody's strangling you. So it was a very, very interesting evening.
It is fascinating how one person's like survival instrument is another person's torture device, because it sounds like, you're talking about the Princess Bride, like that contraption sounds like it would be a form of torture to be in for longer than 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, and what was so interesting to me was, I don't have paralytic polio, so, for me, it was part of my research, but you read memoirs of people who had come down with paralytic polio, and it
Hmm.
comes on pretty quick, and they were just all in the course of a day, suddenly finding themselves struggling to get air, because the diaphragm and the muscles of the ribs are the things that open your lungs aren't working anymore. And so for them, the moment they got into this contraption, suddenly they could breathe. And it was like the most amazing feeling. It was relaxing. It was a relief. So I had expected to read, this sensations of panic and
Mm.
fear and dread, and it was just I mean, 2 weeks down the line, I'm sure they had different feelings about the iron lung, but initially that sense of, "My life is saved, I'm not gonna die, I don't have to struggle to get oxygen."
To that point, I was wondering if, having seen everything that you've seen and experienced all of this, do you have a sense of like what could be the biggest or most revolutionary kind of scientific development that could happen in this particular field within the near future?
Yeah, one of the things that was kind of exciting, there's a couple of things going on in organ transplantation. One of them being xenotransplantation, which is taking, is genetically modifying pigs such that their organs don't trigger a strong rejection from the patient.
Hmm.
So, and it's very early. I mean, there's only one person to my knowledge who's made it past 2 months with a pig organ, but which sounds like not very much until you think about that is that you're just buying time, like it would be a temporary stand-in for a human organ. So somebody might spend 6 months or a year with a pig heart, say, and then become eligible to, get a more permanent human organ. So that's pretty exciting. I mean, that's 30 years of work. I mean, it's amazing how long some of these
Hmm.
things take. We hear about them towards the end, there's been a lot of news about xenotransplantation in the past few years, but, that work's been going on quietly for decades. So that's exciting. There's also work being done. The University of Michigan has it's called the Extracorporeal Life Support Lab, and it's all about keeping organs alive outside the body, or, coming up with techniques that, um, say, breathe for a patient, or filter the blood, like ECMO, which is,
Hmm.
it's a way of having the blood pass through this device that oxygenates it and, puts it back in the body. So they're looking at ways to extend the lifespan of organs. Like right now, if the classic method is to put it on ice and ship it out, and you've got like 4 to 6 hours, and they're talking about expanding that, um, using these portable perfusion systems, like a heart in a box, so they could keep blood circulating um, through the heart outside the body and keep it
Hmm.
viable for longer. So 8 hours instead of 6 hours, 12 hours, and then the other stuff they're doing, which would extend it even to 12 or 48, long enough even so that they could test it, see if it's functioning well, possibly even fix it, which would be great because right now there's a age cutoff. If an organ is, if you're beyond a certain age, you can't donate. Your heart wouldn't be used. But some of these hearts are actually in pretty good shape. So if you could test it and make its function the criteria, sorry, criterion. You could
Hmm.
make its function the reason, it's either rejected or used, you know what I mean? So it'd be a better
Hmm.
way of choosing organs that are gonna be transplanted. You wouldn't have to you wouldn't lose as many of them. So that's cool. So that's, and because there's such a shortage, at least 6,000 people per year is the
Hmm.
estimate that I read. People die waiting for an organ in this country, so, that's pretty cool.
Definitely. And like you said, like it's something that although it might not sound super impressive to the layperson of like, oh, the pig heart only lasted 2 months inside of a human, but that's like you said, like 30 years of work to get those 2 months. And that uh, technology or process could only kind of grow from there, hopefully. It does seem to
Yeah.
me that like there could be, did you encounter anyone who was like an ethicist or kind of like questioning the ethics of the xenotransplants we said with the genetically modified pig organs? Because I'm wondering, like, obviously a lot of the world uses livestock for food, and so we're using the food to keep ourselves alive, which there's not, I know there's vegetarians and people who've raised practical concerns about eating meat and things like that. But it seems to me like, what are the ethics necessarily of raising livestock solely to take their organs? I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. I think that because pigs are routinely, hundreds of thousands of them, if you are talking about globally,
Yeah.
are already raised and slaughtered for people to eat, and we don't need to eat pork. We don't have to
Right.
do that. So there's sort of global acceptance. I'm talking just generally. Certainly, there's
Yeah. Yeah.
loads of people who object to that, but because that is such a common and fairly widely accepted practice, I think that when you then talk about um, using a pig to provide an organ to save a life, it's easier to kind of fold that into what we are already doing to pigs.
Hmm.
I mean, I think it would be great if like all of a sudden nobody used pig. I still love a carnitas taco. I'm
Hmm.
guilty, but I would also be happy if somebody came along and said, "You know what? We've just done enough to pigs. No more screwing around. Leave the pigs alone." I'd be like, "Yes, I don't need to eat carnitas tacos. It's horrible. Let's not do that." But because we already are doing that on such a large scale, I think it's easier to justify using a pig's organs to extend the life of a person, particularly, a kid or,
Yeah.
somebody young with their whole life ahead of them. But I guess you could say the pig had it the whole life ahead of him. So, but sure, yeah, I'm sure, yeah, there will be people who object, and I'm sure there are people who object. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and there's obviously no easy answer to that. But it's just something that I was thinking about as I was pondering that because I never really considered that prior to learning about it in the book. On a similar note, not a similar note, but speaking about like human to human transplants, one of the last chapters in the book, I think it might be the final chapter, is you spend time in a tissue donation facility uh, where the team is removing various tissues from a deceased person's body. Here in the United States, I know individuals we need to opt in to becoming a donor like that. It's not an opt out system like there are in other parts of the world and Europe in some countries. But having seen the donation process as up close and personal as you have, what would you tell someone who's maybe considering becoming a donor or maybe who's not currently registered as a donor but could be swayed into doing it if they had a little bit more information?
I guess what I would say is to focus on the good that comes of it. Somebody is
Hmm.
a tissue donor, you're talking about ligaments and tendons and skin and even muscle, bone for sure. This is the figure that I was told, up to 75 people could benefit from that. And the procedures, whether it's removing organs or removing, skin or bone, it's surgery. And I've spent time in operating rooms where surgery on the living is going on, and I've spent time in room operating suites where the person is dead. And either way, it's not a pretty or soothing thing to see. It's surgery. You're talking about opening up a body and mucking around and taking things out and putting things in. But you're focusing on the result. People don't go into surgery going, "Hey, can you let me know exactly in detail what that's going to be like when remove the tumor from my pancreas or whatever?" It's like, no, you're focused on the end result.
Hmm.
So, I would hope that people, when they make that decision about organ or tissue donation, that they're focusing on the result, which I think most people do, particularly because, okay, you're going to be dead. You're not going to be, you're not going to feel anything. You're not going to see anything. You're dead. So why not do something useful? It's kind of a heroic thing to do as a dead person. Like most people don't do anything that heroic when they're alive. so
Right.
so here's your chance, person, to be a better person when you're dead. Be a good be a good dead guy.
Even if you're a mediocre human being while you're
Yes.
alive, just at least try to be a better dead person.
Damn straight.
Well, Mary, you've been very generous with your time. I know that we are running short on time at the moment. Um, Replaceable You, as we've been talking about, is out this fall. Everyone should check it out. Have you given any thought to what might be next for you? Is there anything that you can share at the moment, or are things kind of still early on in the process?
I don't know what the next book is, and I hate that. I like to know exactly what I'm stepping into. So if anybody has a great Mary Roach book idea, write to me, care of W. Norton, and let me know because I'm 66 now, so I don't know how many more books I'll be doing, but I'm not done yet. I'll have to maybe replace some pieces, but at some point. But I want to keep going, so I am open to ideas. I don't actually know what is next.
Have you considered NFL referees for your next book?
Oh my god, that's perfect for me. Thank you, Chris.
No, I'm sure whatever you think of next will be great, and we'll all be looking forward to it. Are there any authors or writers that you're reading right now that you're excited about that you think our listeners should check out?
I am right now reading Geoff Dyer's book, not the new one. For some reason, I've landed on Geoff Dyer spent a couple of weeks on an aircraft carrier, and Geoff Dyer is just one of my favorite nonfiction writers. He's very
Mhm.
funny. He's just able to just create these scenes and moments that are anyway. That's I'm reading. It's called Another Great Day at Sea. So I'm reading that. What else? What have I need to go on my Goodreads to see what I've what I've just been reading. I'm often blurbing something, so there's those books. Tom Zeller, I think it is. His book on migraine just came out called Headache or The Headache,
Mhm.
which was he gets cluster headaches. Oh my God, just horrible, horrible. They call them the
Yeah.
suicide headache or the something like that. Anyway, I just was reading that one and yeah, I'm mostly a fiction reader. I just read Kevin Barry, The Heart in Winter.
Mhm.
He's a really fabulous novelist with a good sense of humor. Similarly, Patrick DeWitt. I love the novels of Patrick DeWitt. Beautiful writing, but also funny. That's the kind of thing I really love. Charles Portis, I loved his books.
Would you ever do fiction yourself, or you feel like you're strictly narrative nonfiction?
No, you know what, Chris? Because it would suck. It would just be it'd be like, "Oh, Mary tried to write fiction and it's not very good." I just don't I love to go out into the world, see things, and bring back, this pile of stuff and build the best thing I can with it, but you take away my pile of stuff and it has to come from here, I just don't have that kind of imagination. I live in awe of good fic I just oh, you know what I just read? Angel Down, the new one by Daniel Kraus.
Mhm.
He wrote Whale Fall, which was an amazing novel, and, I mean, I've been reading his books for a very long time, but the new one is quite astounding. So that one I read recently, like 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Well, I am happy to talk about the book that I just read most recently, which is Replaceable You. I have to say, I think the mark of success of any work of writing or piece of art is its ability to, support and spread empathy and understanding. And I think it does just that. It's really fun. And it's a fun and thoughtful look at an aspect of health and medicine and to some extent beauty and society that I don't think most of us think about. So, I thank you for writing it. I also think that it achieves something that a lot of great narrative nonfiction does, which is, it reminds the reader, especially with popular science and nature writing, it reminds the reader how borderline miraculous, but also messy life on this planet is. And even with its various hardships and difficulties, we shouldn't take it for granted because it is not easy to substitute or replace even the most basic or simple parts of our bodies. So, uh,
So true.
really, I'm like, okay, duly noted. We've only got the one body, and we got to take care of them the best that we can, and appreciate them because, as you learn in the book, there's a lot that's we can't control over our own anatomy and our own biology. There's a lot of these processes that are automatically happening, and it kind of makes you feel like a more passive participant in whatever this life thing is. But it makes me happy and very appreciative for my own health. So I hope.
Well said. Well said. Thank you.
I hope everyone listening will go to their local Barnes & Noble and get Replaceable You, Adventures in Human Anatomy, or online at bn.com and order a copy there. Mary Roach, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And I would say I was at that Barnes and Noble. Where was I? Philly or Boston? I can't remember now. But so cool what what Barnes and Noble has been doing with letting the store managers kind of curate the store and kind of making it more like a local bookstore. I thought it was great. Yeah.
So, listener, check out your local Barnes & Noble and see what we've been up to. Hopefully, you'll find things, some surprises, some exciting discoveries. So, until next time, I've been Chris Gillespie. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.